I know it feels like Kentucky basketball is entering a new era with Mark Pope at the helm, but the Wildcats are currently in hot pursuit of their next Anthony Davis.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing a recruit that Mark Pope and his staff have recently offered. Could he be Kentucky basketball's next Anthony Davis? Going to dive into that on today's show, as well as the ACC-SEC challenge. It's an interesting challenge, to say the least. Kentucky's opponent has been revealed. What do we think about the matchup? And then finally, to wrap up the show, let's take a look at Kentucky's current non-conference slate. A lot of very difficult matchups, including against the Duke Blue Devils. What do we think about Duke as we head into the summer? Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Has Kentucky basketball found their next Anthony Davis? Well, one high school coach currently thinks that he fits the mold that Davis tries to present in the NBA, and the player himself tries to model his game as much as he possibly can after the former Kentucky great. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Niko Bundalo out of Hudson, Ohio, in the Western Reserve Academy, a 6'11", 195-pound power forward, a four-star prospect in the 2025 recruiting cycle, ranked as the number 25 player overall nationally, the number 8 power forward, and obviously the best player in the state of Ohio. Some places have this kid listed at 6'9", others have him listed at 6'11". I saw a couple of different websites also including him at 6'10". We'll keep it here and just say that he is a power forward and a pure stretch four at that for the Kentucky Wildcats. Potentially Nikola Bundalo. He has more of an NBA Anthony Davis type skill set than what Davis currently had, I should say, during his time with the Kentucky Wildcats way back when in 2012. This is a very versatile player that can shoot the basketball and score in a variety of ways. He can put on the ball on the floor with either hand and finish consistently. He looks very comfortable out there. There's certainly a fluidity to his style of play. He's got a very solid post-up game as well, despite being only about 200 pounds. And the big thing that I've noticed about Bundalo over this past season is that he is definitely an improved defender, and his high school coach would definitely say the same. And the reason that I'm talking here about Anthony Davis is because Bundalo himself believes that he tries to model himself after Davis as much as possible. He said to On3 earlier this year, quote, "My versatility allows me to do a lot of things on the court. What keeps me on the floor is that I can do multiple things, whether that is defense, rebounding, or shot blocking shots, and my scoring. I think there is always a reason to keep me on the floor. I'm watching a lot of Anthony Davis. He is someone who can go out and get you 34, but also get 20 rebounds. He is super elite and blocks a lot of shots too. I try and model my game after him as much as I can." And then if you take a look at another interview with On3, his high school coach during his time at Western Reserve has, Matt Garvey, I should say, the head coach there, has spoken very, very highly of Bundalo, talks about just how high energy is, has a very solid personality, comes from a phenomenal family, just a wonderful kid to be around, really, really does absorb the game very quickly and goes out and executes at a very high level. He said he has incredible interpersonal skills and a ton of energy when you talk to him. Super appreciative, rooted in his faith and family. His family, by the way, from Eastern Europe. His father from Serbia, his mother from Bosnia. Unbelievable people, according to his head coach, Matt Garvey. And then he talked a little bit about just how unique this prospect is. His skill set at 6'10" is very unique. His ability to go left and right, finish with both hands at that size. It's really not normal for someone, at least at the high school level. He has a variety of different ways that he can score the basketball. Again, like I said earlier, in the low post, in the mid post, and then outside to the perimeter. He is not afraid to take outside shots. He is slowly becoming, according to On3, a nightmare matchup offensively and defensively. According to Matt Garvey, he's really made some big strides this year, switching, guarding ball screens, his ability to guard the rim, and he has really good timing. And that's what you'll notice about the best shot blockers here coming out of the high school ranks and really up into the college ranks whenever you go to down, or whenever you go to kind of break them down in terms of their NBA potential, is that all of these kids have really, really good timing. And sometimes, we've talked about this a lot here on the show, sometimes it's not necessarily about the statistics. It's not about the blocked shots per se, but it is about affecting the shot. And that's something that Bundalo really does prove throughout his tape, is that he can, at the very least, affect shots. And that's something that Garvey said. He can also be very impactful, challenging every single shot at the rim. This, after going to watch this kid, may be one of the top prospects that I think Mark Pope and his staff should continue to look at as they wade deeper into recruiting the 2025 class. He has been offered by Kentucky just a couple of days ago. Nikola Bundalo, a big-time prospect, pure stretch four who will more than likely thrive in an up-tempo, free-flowing offense. And obviously that's what Kentucky and Mark Pope bring to the table. Versatile scoring threat, improved defender. Could he be Kentucky basketball's next Anthony Davis in terms of size and dominance? We may never see another player like Anthony Davis at the collegiate level, especially with what he was able to do on the defensive end. But the fact that this kid, given his height and dimensions, and given the fact that he loves Davis and tries to model his game after him, has that high energy, I think that's safe to say he's a very important prospect that Kentucky needs to continue to pursue. Let me know what you think about Nikola Bundalo in the comments below, recently offered by the Kentucky Wildcats. The SEC-ACC Challenge, the games have been released, and it's a very interesting slate, to say the least. Let's take a look at Kentucky's matchup in this ACC-SEC Challenge. Let's take a look at the slate as a whole. It's a bit of a weird one. I've got some interesting thoughts on it. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. You can keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, continuing along here on the Friday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, I appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, wherever you are tuned in, I would greatly appreciate it if you went ahead and did that. If you have any questions for the show, I would highly encourage you to leave them in the YouTube comments below or at Locked On UK on Twitter is where you can find me. Also, if you want to join the Locked On Kentucky Discord, free place to talk about all things going on with Big Blue Nation, basketball, football, baseball, anything you want to talk about in there. About 230 of you in there right now. At @LanceDawe_ on Twitter is where you can find the link for that. It's a great place for all of us to kind of hang out and chat, ask different questions. It's a great place for us to discuss things that maybe you want answered on the show. So at @LanceDawe_ is where you can find it. It's pinned on my Twitter if you want to go find that link there. Okay, so let's talk for a little bit about the SEC-ACC Challenge. It's a bit of an interesting slate this year, obviously moving over from the SEC Big 12 Challenge that has been happening for a hot minute, the ACC-SEC Challenge in year 2, and the Kentucky Wildcats playing, drumroll please, the Clemson Tigers on the road in Clemson, South Carolina, this upcoming season. A bit of a weird matchup, don't you think, especially considering North Carolina was, in fact, on the table for Kentucky. Clemson, however, is no slouch. They were an Elite Eight team just a season ago. Very, Very solid team, very solid head coach. Losing P.J. Hall, one of their biggest pieces, obviously, to graduation. But Clemson, as a whole, is a very respectable program, very solid in basketball, pretty consistent over the last several years underneath, I believe, head coach Brad Brownell. Very good team, but not what you would expect for the Kentucky Wildcats. Again, like I mentioned, Kentucky would be expected to play a North Carolina if they weren't already playing Duke at the beginning of the year. You would like to see a Blue Devil here in this spot for the Kentucky Wildcats, but that's just not the case. It's just Clemson, which doesn't really seem like the right decision for this ACC-SEC challenge. Whoever's on the committee, whoever's scheduling this out, it doesn't seem like the right decision for them to make. But then you start to look at some of the other matchups, and you really do kind of scratch your head without looking at the standings for either of these conferences, why some of these matchups are happening. For instance, Miami and Arkansas playing, Georgia versus Notre Dame, Louisville versus Ole Miss. Ole Miss, I think, projected to be a little bit better than the Cardinals this season. Oklahoma versus Georgia Tech. Oklahoma going to be way better than Georgia Tech, I think, this season. South Carolina against Boston College. Doesn't seem like a fair matchup there. Tennessee versus Syracuse isn't balanced either, and that's in Knoxville. Texas A&M versus Wake Forest does seem balanced. North Carolina versus Alabama is obviously the biggest matchup here. Final Four rematch from this past season. Duke versus Auburn, which is also going to be a huge game. Florida versus Virginia. Mississippi State versus Pitt. NC State versus Texas. Virginia Tech versus Vanderbilt. LSU versus Florida State, if I didn't mention it. And Missouri versus California. Noted SEC-ACC matchup here. The Missouri Tigers. Missouri, not located in the southeastern region of the United States, against California, not located on the Atlantic coast in the United States. Southeastern Conference, Atlantic Coast Conference. Gotta love the lack of regionality the sport has been providing recently, but we're not here to talk about that today. I don't necessarily understand some of these matchups. They feel a little lopsided, in my opinion, and with North Carolina on the table and then Alabama versus Clemson also on the table, where you could have swapped these two games out essentially, I don't really feel like this is the best. Again, this is the best move, but I'm not complaining as far as the quality of opponent, because Clemson, again, like I said, is a very good team. A fun note here from the press release, Kentucky owns an all-time mark of 12-4 versus the Tigers, but the two teams have not met since November 29th of 1997. The Wildcats claimed a 76-61 win over the Tigers as part of the Premier Classic in Phoenix during its 1998 national championship season during the last edition of the series. With the 2024-25 matchup set, Kentucky will renew a series that was prominent during its early stages as a program. Kentucky's played at Clemson 4 times, leading the series 3-1, but has not traveled to South Carolina since the 1933-34 season. I personally would have liked to have seen either North Carolina, Syracuse, or maybe even a Notre Dame here for Kentucky. Get them to travel on the road and go play the Fighting Irish. Make them play Virginia, who I think would have also been a more notable game, at least in terms of matchup breakdown of a really good defense against an up-and-coming team with Mark Pope. That would have been a fun conversation to be had. Pitt was a top 4 seed. That would have been an interesting game, I think, possibly for the Wildcats. Clemson, again, as good as they were a season ago, I don't really know how to feel about this game, especially relative to some of the other matchups that we could have seen. And then you look across the board, again, I think that you could have seen Tennessee, Virginia, possibly. I believe that might have been the matchup from this past season. I think you could have run it back. Louisville and Ole Miss, I don't feel like is necessarily a fair matchup. Georgia and Notre Dame, I feel like, again, swap it out with Kentucky. Miami and Arkansas, I think you could give Arkansas a little bit more difficult of a challenge, honestly. We'll see how it shapes up. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Kentucky playing Clemson as part of the SEC-ACC Challenge. Interesting addition to the non-conference slate, to say the very least. Let's take a look at Kentucky's non-con schedule for just a minute. We're going to take a look at every single game that has been scheduled. And then I want to talk specifically here about the earliest game so far that Kentucky has scheduled, the Duke Blue Devils. This team fascinates me as far as their roster makeup goes. We're going to dive into it in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to remind you guys again, if you've not joined the Locked On Kentucky Discord, at @LanceDawe_ is where you can find the link. You can find it pinned at the top of my profile. You can also go check out, if you're watching on YouTube, you can go check out the community tab. And if you scroll down, I believe it's the second most recent post about how you can join the Locked On Kentucky Discord. And then above that, actually above that post on YouTube, there's a question for you guys. And if you've made it to this point in the show, you can leave this in the YouTube comments below or at Locked On UK on Twitter. Big question for you guys. Give me a bold prediction for the Kentucky basketball team heading into this season. Give me a bold prediction. It may be a finish. It may be a record. It may be what they do against an opponent. It may be what they do in the postseason. It may be for a specific players, a group of players. I've already had some of you guys reach out and give your comments on that. If you want to give your comments here or over on that, on the community tab, you are more than welcome to do so. I'm going to answer every single bold prediction here on the show, so you can go leave that comment there. All right, wrapping up the Friday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. So let's talk for a little bit about Kentucky basketball's non-conference slate up until this point. Right now, Kentucky has 7 different games scheduled. 5 of them have dates, and half the group here is going to be very difficult, I think, for a year one coach and his new team to try and overcome, especially considering just how early some of these matchups happen. Kentucky playing Duke on November 12th. We've talked a little bit about that game before, about how important I think it is for Kentucky to find some rhythm early in this season, especially against some of these teams that have a lot of inexperience, a lot of freshmen in their rotation, Duke being one of them. I'll talk about them a little bit more in depth in just a second. They play Clemson on December 3rd. Then they play Gonzaga on December 7th, which is a really, really interesting game here for the Kentucky Wildcats because of just how good I think the Bulldogs are going to be relative to where they were a season ago. They've reloaded. They've added some pieces. They've got some guys returning in the front court. It's going to be a better team than it was a season ago. I think they're going to be, a little more efficient from outside the arc. I know that Mark Few and company don't really like to shoot a ton of threes. Will they do that this year? I doubt it, but they're going to have some pieces. They had a lot of roster issues before the season started last year, and then they had some roster issues as far as injuries go at the beginning of the year. So if they are able to stay healthy, Gonzaga is going to be a very difficult game, especially after coming back from a road trip against Clemson, who again was an Elite 8 team a season ago. Louisville on December 14th. Louisville, a revamped team, obviously, with a new head coach. They're going to be, I think, a respectable opponent, and I think Kentucky getting them at home this season is really nice, all things considered, because they've got some pieces that I think are going to be some serious problems as far as matchup goes. And then you've got Ohio State on December 21st, a week after that Louisville game, a team that has Aaron Bradshaw, a new head coach as well, a team that's projected to be better than they were a season ago, obviously, but is Ohio State going to be anything more than, I think, average in the Big Ten? Not quite sure. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Western Kentucky and Lipscomb are the other two additions here that currently don't have dates on those matchups. The Hilltoppers coming into Rupp Arena as well as Lipscomb. So to break this all down here, that's 3 Sweet 16 teams that Kentucky's going to play. It's 2 Elite 8 teams in that group of Sweet 16. Louisville, much improved. Ohio State, improved. Gonzaga, improved. Clemson, losing pieces, but still formidable. And then you have Duke. I don't know if Duke is going to be just good or if they're going to be really, really, really good. When you start to look at the breakdown of their roster, it's a little confusing the way that they've tried to set this thing up. They are bringing in the best recruiting class in the country, which includes 4 5-star players. They brought in some transfer portal pieces that I think individually are very talented. But as far as position goes for Duke, the majority of the roster is comprised of 6'5", 6'6" wings, specifically players that are either listed at small forward at their previous schools or listed at small forward coming out of the high school ranks. For instance, their starting point guard, projected starting point guard this season, Tyrese Proctor, who was returning from a season ago, played 78% of his minutes with the Blue Devils a season ago at the 3. He played the 3 and point, didn't play 2, with, I believe, Jared McCain playing at that shooting guard spot a season ago. But Proctor played small forward for most of his minutes, and he's projected to be the starter at point. Then you have Sion James, a Tulane transfer, who played power forward for the Green Wave, but I think will slide up to shooting guard or maybe even play point. Darren Harris, a 4-star small forward at 6'5", probably going to have to play shooting guard alongside Caleb Foster, who I think is the only true shooting guard on this team, and truly the only true player at his position in the backcourt, period. Then you look to small forward, and this is where things kind of start to logjam. Isaiah Evans. You've got Mason Gillis, 2 different players that played small forward or power forward a season ago. Cooper Flagg, a 5-star freshman at 6'9", probably going to play power forward but could slide up to the 3. Cameron Sheffield, a Rice transfer, 6'5", played power forward and small forward for the Owls a season ago, medically redshirted, actually 2 seasons ago, medically redshirted last year. I believe it's Knuppel. I may be butchering that last name, another 5-star small forward. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different small forwards that could play between small forward and power forward. And that's not including Darren Harris, who I slid up to shooting guard for the sake of this conversation. Then you have center, Malik Brown, a Syracuse transfer who is 6'8", does not have a versatile offensive game, primarily operates around the rim. Very good rebounder, very good player efficiency-wise in the paint, but some starting lineups, according to different Duke websites, have him potentially up at the 4, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially if Duke wants to play versatilely and they want to have guys like Flagg in there that can shoot the basketball, which Flagg absolutely can. And then you have 2 5-star centers that have some weight, have some height to them. They're very talented, but I would have Brown at center before I had him at power forward, especially with the fact that Mason Gillis, a Purdue transfer, and Cooper Flagg, a 5-star freshman, it could exist at that position and be great. It's a lot of wings, a lot of different wings on this roster, and it's Kentucky, what I would assume to be one of, if not Kentucky's first matchup of the season. It's going to be a weird one. This is a very talented Duke team, but I'm not quite sure how they're going to operate in their backcourt. It's going to be a weird game. I think it's definitely going to be a feeling out process for both of these rosters. So let me know what you think in the comments below about the potential of the next Anthony Davis here, the ACC-SEC Challenge, and the non-con slate for the Kentucky Wildcats. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_. You can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.